D.T. Moss. I am the Director of Racial Equity and Inclusion at Blue Star Families. I'm also an Army retired First Sergeant with 24 years of service, and now a military mom, which is my proudest role. My daughter is serving in the Air Force, and my son is in the Army. And it's such a pleasure to be your moderator for today's session. So today we have an amazing panel, and the name of our panel is Crossing the Fence Line to Retain a Diverse Force. We'll be talking about or with civilian and military families and counterpartners, and we really want to find out how we can create a partnership in this space where we want to be able to strengthen our total force. We have to talk about things that are uncomfortable, but it's so necessary in this work. And it's just a pleasure to be with Blue Star Families as we discuss this. Our goal today is wherever you are, whether you're inside or outside of the fence line, that you will come away with a fresh perspective, a new strategy, or a new idea about how we can work together as counterparts on the other side to improve the experiences of all military families. So here's the format for today's panel. We'll take a few moments to allow the panelists to briefly introduce themselves and also share a quick story on their experience and how and why they're here today. So I'm super honored to be here with this amazing panel. Can we give them a round of applause really quickly? After that, I'll kick off the conversation using some findings from Blue Star Family's recent published report on the diverse experiences of military and veteran families of color. And then we will open up the floor to allow questions from you all to our panelists, as we know that they're not only experts in this field, but they also have a wealth of knowledge. So let's get started with introductions. We will start off with Major General Tony Taguba.
Please call me Tony. Can you all see me? I used to be a stallist Vic here, but I spent 34 years on active duty, literally been around the world a couple of times, literally, because one of my jobs came out of a government accounting office where it was called Family MWR, Morale, Welfare, and Recreation, where my predecessor was absent and not visiting folks around the world. So in my 2 years, I went west, and then the second year I went east. And I really appreciated what military families were about, especially the ones that are in the remote and isolated locations. One would think that Fort Drum is next to Syracuse. I went up there, and it was far from Syracuse. Fort Wainwright is way up there where the sun never sets. And that whole idea that our military families, as I considered, as 51% of the vote, regardless of color. And as you can see, I'm a different color. And I've gone through my own trials and tribulations of if I'm not wearing my uniform, I'm just John Q. Public. And people actually took advantage of that until I show up with my uniform on, and the question is, so you're a two-star general? And I said, well, yeah. In fact, my favorite story, and I'll end, is when I parked my car at Fort Leavenworth, Kansas. And one of the perks is you get to park next to the PXSS general officer. And I noticed this gentleman, elderly gentleman, parked right across from me and in a truck. And so he gets out of the truck, he walked around my car, and I saw him, and he was writing something on the trunk of my car, my rental car. So I said, excuse me, sir, may I help you? And he says, are you authorized to park here? And I said, I think so, And he says, well, I need to see your ID card. So I said, I'll show you my ID card if you show me yours. And so he looked at my ID card, and he says, you a two-star general? I said, yes, sir, I am, and you're a two-star too. He's Caucasian. He says, how did that happen? So I said, it's the 21st century, I said, did you know that we have women that are admirals and generals? He said, how did that happen? He's a 95-year-old World War II veteran. And I guess he was so secluded that none of that stuff happened. I shook his hand. Nickname was Rocket. I offered to help him to the PX, and he said no. And he said his mumbling words was, "Let me think about this." So those are the kinds of things when people don't get to understand what's around them, because I still said sir to him. But I think we have a mission to do today, and I think we can share all of our stories and be tolerant. Thank you.
Wow, all right. Well said, sir. I'm going to try to slide up here because I feel like y'all can't see me. All right, so my name is Victor Angry. I have a very interesting career, and I could start it from how I grew up, where I grew up, and how at 10 years old I wish I was not here any longer, and not that I committed suicide, but the thought was heavily in my head because my neighborhood, my upbringing had nowhere to go until this lady, I call her my godmother, who is my uncle's girlfriend, said, "I see more in you than you see in yourself." So she stopped me and literally paused me to think about somebody actually cared about my life, right? Asked me what I wanted to do with my life. I said, go to college. She says, no, we're not going to do that, because what I would have done is gone to college and been the best partier in the world. And so she knew that. So she asked me what else I wanted to do, and I said, see the world. My brother, Reg, was in the Air Force at the time, so she literally drove me to the Air Force recruiting office, where if you hear a general at my retirement tell it, he says that the Air Force recruiter wasn't in the office because they were at lunch, and a stealthy Army recruiting, young NCO swooped me up, and the rest is history. So I joined the Army, all because the recruiter told me, he said, what if I told you you could outrank your brother in 5 years? Truth of the story is I did outrank my brother in 5 years, but that's where the story begins, because I went on from that moment to, become the first African-American lead the entire Army National Guard. Since I retired from that, I got into public office. Don't ask me how. Well, I'll tell you how. I was a volunteer firefighter, and there was an opportunity. And what I was doing around the county as a volunteer firefighter, I was a community outreach person, and so I worked with the youth, educated homeowners on how to save your home from burning it down, and just teaching smart safety. So I became a known figure around Prince William County, and so unfortunately we had a supervisor pass away in office. They asked me to run for the position. I did. And in that position, interesting enough, I was the first African-American to be on the Prince William Board of County Supervisors. Now, about all that is the fact that I shouldn't have to say I was the first to do any of this, but it's really, I don't know if it's a shame or what we can call it, but the fact that those things happened, one in 2007 or 2009, and the other in 2019. We were well into the 2000s, if you get what I'm saying here. But I'm really happy to be a part of this panel discussion, really interested in all the discussion and engaging. And I will end by saying this. The only reason I'm an expert in the field of any of this is because I'm an expert from the field. So I can share with you in this topic of discussion, real world stories is what I call them, because sometimes we learn best from past experiences, and that's where we get our wisdom from, right? So, I'm happy to be here to share with you some real world stories, say that 3 times fast, and just, and hope that it sticks with all of you, and even those for the recording, and so that we can move on from here. Because personally, I continue to say this, we can't continue doing this. Like, we got to get over whatever this is for the equality of all. And I think you'll be very interested and concerned about some of the findings from the study. So, thank you.
Good afternoon. I was one who was coughing during his presentation. I'm sorry. I'm with the National Police Foundation, which is a think tank organization in Washington that's 51 years old, which as of Monday changed its name after 50 years to the National Policing Institute. We're an endowed institution that does research and technical assistance and pushing the profession. It pushed me. I was started as a lawyer in New York City. First cops I met, I arrested when I was a prosecutor. And the commissioner of New York gave me a challenge and said, why don't you think about joining us? And I did. I became a police chief. I've been a chief of 4 cities over the last 25 years, and I was on the board of the foundation. And they asked me to come off the board and become the senior counselor, which means sort of give advice instead of get advice. For 25 years, I went to every shooting, every homicide, every wake, every funeral. I buried a generation of children. Almost all of them were people of color. Almost all of them were young. Almost all of them knew each other. No 6 degrees of separation. Philadelphia's not at war with New York. New York's not at war with Philadelphia. Philadelphia kills Philadelphia. New York kills New York. Chicago kills Chicago. Washington kills Washington. Our own children kill each other. And our response to this in America has been to arrest the ones who survived. So I'm sort of in the second part of my life doing my penance, trying to think about how to do things a little bit differently in policing. I am aware that the uniform doesn't change the color of a person's skin. And these same complaints are aired by officers, police officers who wear a uniform, who are seen first as black or Hispanic or Asian before they're seen as blue. So I see that, I see the reason I'm here. I'm happy to be in this crowd. I'm happy to listen. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. My name is Ingrid Herrera-Yee. I am a clinical and research psychologist. I'm also a first-generation born here from Guatemala. Actually, I spoke Spanish before English, although you can't tell, no accent in either side, fortunately. I'm also the Racial Equity and Inclusion Committee co-chair for Blue Star Families. And this is something that I'm so passionate about. I've spent the last better part of 2 decades working with military families of color, particularly Latino, Spanish-speaking families. And you know, advocacy and, you know, seeing firsthand our families who don't know the language, who had no access to resources, who are at greater risk for so many things, you know, from everything from mental health and suicide to, you know, physical health concerns, hunger, you know, all kinds of issues because they could not access resources in their language. They didn't know, you know, what they didn't know. So, you know, the work of Blue Star Families is so very important in this because, you know, it's really never been a focus, not military families of color, not multiracial families. And that's what makes this study so important. And that is really at the crux of everything that we're going to talk about today, is the findings from this really groundbreaking and important study, you know, and what we all can do as, you know, those who support the military and military families, those of us who are part of military families, those in the community, how are we going to work together, you know, to solve these problems, to help these families that had been largely kind of invisible in the background. And so, you know, before we get into, you know, the larger discussion, just wanted to tell you all a little bit about the study. As you heard, it's the diverse experiences of military and veteran families of color. And a lot of work went into this, and I was fortunate to be a part of a lot of the analysis and data and the writing and the research, and also focus groups. So we conducted focus groups, that was one part of this, with, you know, veterans, military families, service members of color. And, you know, really rich conversations that became a part of this report. We also looked at what was already out there. We did an exploratory analysis, and that's how we knew that there's not a lot out there, at least not publicly available out there, that we could really, you know, sink our teeth into and talk about. So this was, it really made it that much more important for us, and we felt just incredible ownership around this and wanting to do this right. And then we surveyed our military families of color and our veteran families of color. And finally, I was fortunate, again, to sit in on a couple of these. There were interviews with over 100 different stakeholder groups, everything from government to nonprofit to military. And, you know, and basically what we did was, you know, Blue Star Families compiled, you know, what they're doing out there, because that's sort of a problem, right? We don't know what everyone else is doing, so half the time everyone's working in silos and we don't know, again, what we don't know. And so, you know, based on all of that, we came up with some actionable, you know, recommendations based on, you know, what they're doing and what they have to say, and from the findings of all of this together. So this is a really important piece of work, you know, that we're discussing here, and it's just the beginning. And it's just scraping the surface. We've just got it, we've just started. So this conversation, I'm sure, is one of many. And we're just really happy that you're here.
Thank you to the entire panel. Now you see why I'm so excited to be sitting up here with all of them. Thank you so much. Well, let's jump right into our panel questions. So, statistic number 1. He's laughing because the first statistic, I'm going to ask General Taguba a question. So, statistic number 1, sir. 30% of active duty family respondents of color in the Blue Star Family Study report having made the decision not to accept an assignment, whether it was a PCS, which is our permanent change of station, or orders for a job, knowing that it may negatively impact the service member's career at some point in their time in service. So, question to General Taguba. What are the implications of active duty service members indicating they are making decisions to forego assignments to the health and readiness of the force?
Well, I'm a baby boomer, so we have to take a look at the demographics of the millennials, the ones that's following me, and then also Generation Z, or actually Generation X or Y. And my barometer is my son. He's in the Army, born in 1985, stationed at Fort Bliss, Texas. And recently, he basically said, I don't think I can continue beyond 20, because he's been deployed twice, one in Afghanistan and one in Iraq. And I asked him why. He says, well, I need to spend more time with family, typically, right? Because he has a three-year-old daughter. And so I asked him, what do you want to do? What's your plan B after retirement? Because he wants to retire. He says, well, I'll go find a job and I'll live someplace else. And when I asked him, what drove you from having that decision? Well, typically, I've been in the Army since you were in the Army, Dad. But it's one of those things where most of the families now, I'm just talking about the families, they're more tech savvy than anything else. They will go online, and if you're going to some Fort Pickup, I call it Fort Pickup place or a naval base place, is then they'll go on the website and they start doing their homework. Trust me, that's what they do. I grew up where you get a packet from the installation, Phil will tell you, that has all the demographics about that particular installation. But today's world, because everything is all social media, they'll go on. I get some of this stuff on Facebook, on Messenger and the like anybody being assigned there. It doesn't matter what color you are. What they want is it stable? Are the schools good? How rated are they? Where's the hospital located and whatever have you. And there's a myth out there that when we have military families, they live on base. I call it the gated community. Far from the truth. 2 days ago, I get a phone call from a major, sight unseen. My son gave him my number, and he's being assigned to the Pentagon. So the assignment is that, especially in the Army, they go to a marketplace, and they hunt. It's like the classified ads, right? It's no longer, Taguba, you're going to go to Fort Pickup place. They could literally go online and say, I want to do this, I want to do that. But that's about it. And then, you're subjected to the whims of the Navy, the Marine Corps, whatever have you. You may not get your 1, 2, or 3. You may get something different. But the family has a vote. That's 51% of the vote. And if they say, okay, what about my job? Most of the family members today are employed. My daughter-in-law is employed. And she doesn't want to live El Paso, Texas, because her parents are there. And to think that that's how they measure their success. Not everybody will stay 20. Some will stay 3. Some will stay 4. And some may they just said, I'm going to go join the Guard or the Reserve because they're static. They don't necessarily go on PCS. If we just think about where they're going to go, if we go back to the place where they don't have to hunt where they're going to rent, or they don't have to hunt that I'm going to go stay at Fort Belvoir, the major I was talking to you about, because you're going to be on the list. And what happens if you don't get the house that you want in this metro area? What about, I asked him, he's got 3 kids, one's 17 and the youngest is 4, a big church, where do you go? What about housing off post? Those all comes into play. And who do I call besides you, General Taguba? Don't call me Tony because I don't want him to be intimidated. And that's how they deal with it today. You got to don't deal with the colonels and generals because they'll find their way to retirement to begin with. If anybody, just ask them, you are welcome on so and so on the base or on the military post, and there's someone that you can actually contact, not a multiple of, if you go to online, they go, oh, these are all that 1-800 number you call. That's a lot of phone calls. If they just get that old-fashioned welcome, we call that sponsorship. We don't do sponsorships anymore because it's too hard. Just go online, get a hold of Taguba, and he'll tell you everything about Fort Belvoir. Well, then it becomes a bit more difficult for them to try to make up their plans. If they get assigned to a remote and isolated location, or even, say, Okinawa or Guam, they will want to know how long we're going to stay, where all the schools are, I work, can I get a job, and every place is different. And trust me, they're going to make a decision after about 2 to 3 years after that they're going to go someplace else. I told that major, don't tell me, I won't tell you all about the Pentagon. I tell you where you think you ought to do with your family, because we're in the metro area. Told a friend of mine, and I got assigned to Okinawa. Never been there. We don't culturalize our families today.
And that leads
yeah.
me to a follow-up question I have.
Okay.
For you, sir.
I don't know if I answered your question.
You did.
Follow up. Okay.
So what I'm hearing you say, sir, is that families are sitting around the dinner table and they're making these decisions as a family. As you said, 51% of families have a vote. That's so powerful, and I just wanted to really highlight that it's just not about the service member anymore. And what's so great about our research is that we're actually talking to family members as we make these decisions. I have one follow-up question for you, and I think you can answer it in about 30 seconds, I think, maybe. And is, for those who don't think that we should talk about DEI and race, how does an inclusive force translate to a ready force? Because that's really, truly what we're talking about today.
Are you counting? DEI has been on the networks for a long, long time. It's nothing new. I have a blended family. There's so many blended families out there, and they will ask questions. And if, people of color or where the neighborhoods are and whatever have you. My daughter was called the N-word, and she's biracial, Filipino. Her mother is a blonde, blue-eyed egg farmer's daughter and whatever have you, staunch Republican, if I say so myself. I'm a Democrat. We don't talk politics to them. But when she asked me, this is a Fort Stewart, Georgia, deep south. What is that word, Dad? I said, who called you that? He says, a black boy. So we just had a sit-down dinner. And that translated to, we need to get out of here. That was a major at the time, because it's not good for the kids. And it translates to readiness. I was told that for you to leave, if I left here, that there's going to be 4 people. One, and then they may not come. The second one tries to show up, and then maybe the 4th one will take the job. That's a cycle of 4. okay? And it's rather difficult for you to make a decision on the table that says, when do we leave here? Well, one last thing. I've been accused of being a self-serving careerist. This is for my kids. Because on 2 jobs that I had, one, they said, we're not going with you. You can go by yourself, Dad, back to Korea for the 4th time. Good job. The second one was, we're not going with you because I was being sent to Japan, and my son did not want to go to Japan because it was his last semester in high school. He's not uprooting. So, you know what happens to that? You get a case of beer, or maybe a 6-pack, you go in your room, you drink a lot, and you say, okay, I'm staying with you, and I'm calling my boss. I said, I can't go there. Because the career is fine, but you stay with your family.
Thank you so much, sir. As we move on to our statistic number 2, this will be directed to Mr. Angry Victor. 46% of active duty family respondents of color report they have considered racial ethnic discrimination in their ranking or promotion decisions. So, Mr. Angry, during your 23 years in service, did you ever consider racial ethnic discrimination in your installation ranking decision?
Yeah, thank you for that question. And let's put it in context. So for the record, I retired in 2011. So I've been out the Army now for 12 years. And I can tell you a very specific story to ranking. And I will just start by saying this. The fact that 12 years later, we still are having service members addressing this as, what was the percentage you gave again? 46%. And again, I can only share with you real world stories from the field of my experience. 2005, just graduated from the Sergeant Major's Academy, so now we have to get the assignments out of the way. So I'm AGR, which is Active Guard Reserve, so I'm full-time guard, so I must find an assignment. Now I'm there with 4 other Sergeants Major that come from the National Guard DC area. There's roughly 6 assignments that we can go to. 4 of them are very challenging, what I would say, for an aggressive go-getter young sergeant major who wants to do the tough assignment so you can continue moving on and be with the troops. One of them, not the assignment any of us wanted, and I will clean it up after I tell you what that was. So that assignment was to be the Army National Guard Equal Opportunity Sergeant Major. Now the other assignment was, a military police assignment in Afghanistan, training, the Afghan force. There was a couple of other pretty key, what I would call relevant assignments. So I'm not going to ask you to raise hand, but let's just think to ourselves, who do you think got the assignment as the Equal Opportunity Sergeant Major? Now, as I reported to that assignment, I told my boss at the time, civilian boss, I said, look, I don't plan on being here long because this isn't the assignment that I wanted. I said, I'm put here, and 4 of the white guys got the key assignments, and they put me in this assignment, and this is not what I wanted. So I even told our tours branch and the sergeant major who ran it this same story. Now, let's just fast forward. So I don't want to get biblical on you or anything, but I will tell you what my boss told me and then what that sergeant major told me. My boss told me, look, you clearly were put here because you're the best person to be in this assignment, to do this assignment at this time. My sergeant major said, look, what I see in you is that these other guys can't do this assignment here, and I need someone that can actually engage with the people because we have issues that we need to fix. I wasn't really trying to hear either one of those because I'm the young, hard charged, go-get-it sergeant major. But I will tell you, coming out of that assignment, that I was the best person to be in that assignment, that we did more great things for the National Guard with the Equal Opportunity Program at the time, which has then turned into diversity, equity, and inclusion, which I not necessarily played a major role in, but I can just simply say that for being there was needed to. But back to the question at hand. At the time of why I got that assignment, it still points to me as I look around the military, even to this day, and look in these positions that are for diversity or equal opportunity. really, it's a lot of minorities in these positions. So it would just lead me to simply say, this area of work is important for all races, nationalities, genders, whatever your origin is. It's important for all. But when you see who gets these assignments, it does lead you to question some things. And so I'll leave with this one last thing. As I've traveled around the United States, looking at the program through all the states in the National Guard, I would ask one question of everyone I had to interview. And I'll give you two specific responses to this question. How is equal opportunity working for you? If I ask a black or a minority soldier, they would say, all the problems, or it's working well, or, this could be better, or when I processed this, it did all of this. But if I ask a white soldier that very same question, they would say, well, I'm not hearing any complaints. I don't hear any issues, so I think it's working well. The point there is, it's not for one side and not the other. It's for all people. So equal opportunity, even this diversity piece we're talking about, is a holistic thing. But it seems, as you dig into it, most people will think it'll only apply on one side and not the other.
Thank you. I really want to open up this question to the panel and allow opportunity for either Chief Esserman or Dr. Yee, if you have experienced this, or even not really having to experience, but I just want to know, what advice would you offer a military family that's going through this? What just your thoughts and resources would you present to them?
You want to go first?
Yes. Well, I think for our military families, just offering as much support and information as possible. One of the things that we found in this, and I'm going to talk about it soon, in this survey, is that they don't know, what is out there for them. They don't know how to access, resources or information. And so I think that communication is key, and that I think would be really helpful information for those of us who work with and support our military families.
Thank you.
My experience is that as a police chief of a community, we think the military take care of their own, and we don't realize they're part of our community. And we don't really think about the fact that the 51% are in the neighborhood, go to our schools, use our school buses, shop at our stores. Because if we don't see the uniform, they're invisible to us. And that's a mistake, probably one that I've made in the past. And the only way I know how to address that mistake is advocacy. That we have to open our eyes and be heard, or we have to hear and you have to be heard. Because I was up here listening to people who've moved, like this doctor to my left, who's moved 20 times or 10 times. My kids have bitched and moaned because they've moved 3 times up and down Route 95 between New York and Providence, Rhode Island. And one job I gave back because I moved my child in 10th grade and it was a mistake. I told the mayor he had to fire me. I gave back my paycheck because I didn't want to move my son in 10th grade. And I shouldn't be complaining when I hear what's going on with the military families move around the world. Because my kids could always go back to New York for a weekend to see their grandparents. It wasn't a big deal. So I guess you have to be heard. That's why I come away believing. Because no one's going to hear you otherwise.
Thank you, Chief. As we move on to our third statistic, both active duty and veteran responders of color reported challenges assessing an array of community resources, as Dr. Yee began to speak about, to include food and nutrition assistance, employment and career development, and legal assistance, just to name a few. In fact, 45% of active duty respondents and 60% of veteran respondents of color who report needing caregiving resources say their need is unmet. So, question to Dr. Herrera-Yee. Can you describe to us the barrier military families of color face assessing needed resources?
Absolutely. There's one thing that I saw over and over again in the survey, and that is that, of those who had unmet needs, they described that they didn't know how to access these resources, and they did not know that they were eligible for these resources. And that's really important here, because we have, I don't know how many thousands of nonprofit organizations that are military focused, that have all of these resources for our families. And, a lot of partners in the military too, programs and initiatives, and, they're getting evaluated. There's all of these things out there, but they're not reaching our families. That's a big number when you're talking about 60% of veteran, 45% of active duty families with caregiving, which is, that is all encompassing. A family is very affected by this, when you are caregiving and not having access, or thinking you don't have access, or thinking you're not eligible. It's huge. And for those, there's a lot of barriers other than just, I don't know if I'm eligible, or I don't know if I don't know how to access it. Some in our survey talked about they didn't think they could afford it. And, when you're thinking about families of color, or those who are, who speak different languages, the language barriers, and, barriers around, just knowing who to reach out to or who to turn to. That's when you need the community, you need, a social support network, you need people around you that, will say, hey, I know about this organization or this initiative that's going to help. And, that's really the piece that's missing for our families of color, for a lot of families, is that they don't know how to access. They don't know if they're eligible. And for veteran families in particular, that early transition period is important, particularly around food insecurity and employment. And so we know that is, sort of a key important time frame to really reach out to those families when they no longer are in that transition and don't have access to all the military affiliated services. And for our active duty caregivers, it was mostly Hispanic families that had unmet needs around caregiving. But then, veteran families kind of across the board in almost every category had these unmet needs. And for them, number one, most of the time was eligibility. And so they're not getting the message, that I might be eligible for this program or that program, that could help my family. And so, it's kind of disheartening when you do think about all those, 40-something thousand, I don't remember the number of organizations that are out there to help, and they don't know how to access it or if they're even eligible. So they give up, in essence, right? A lot of the families that I've worked with in the past, they just don't even try. They don't engage. They need it, but they won't try. Yeah.
Yes. Thank you.
I was once the AARP Military Family Ambassador. That was my title when they hired me on. So I had the opportunity to travel around across the states and had audience like this, and sometimes up to 500, and they all come. And so it's not just about the public who are non-military, but there's a lot of military in there, retirees, veterans, and the like. And the first thing that comes to mind is language. How many here are on Medicare? Nobody? I know Phil is. If you take a look when you are eligible for Medicare and you get your first bill, turn page 3, I think. There's 11 languages on there. We rely on Spanish, Chinese, English most of the time. But trying to do caregiving for veterans and just about everybody is a struggle, at least for me, because I had to go through translation, for example. Detroit is a good one, where they say, well, anybody from the community speaks Hindi, Dari, Pashtun, because I need somebody to take care of my mom. Nobody. So we're kind of strapped on the language side of the house. Saturation of, as Dr. Herrera-Yee said, there's so much organizations out there that literally litter, pardon my word, the website, and it's hard to access, especially when you don't have a laptop or they can't print it out. The ones that are in that particular space are veterans who are 60 and above. I once asked them, how many of you have an iPhone? And one of them said, can I take your photograph with my flip top? I said, how do you operate that thing? Well, we had a selfie on that one. See, that's part of our diversity, is that too many languages. A lot of folks don't speak English. Some folks have an accent, like English is my second language. I've worked so hard to I'm not even a master of that. But translation is mixed. It's lost in translation. I don't know how the solution is. AARP has a lot of programs. You don't even have to be a member as long as you could access the website. But language, ability to log in and try to understand and navigate, especially VA benefits, that's hard. Especially when you get a memo that said, you're not eligible. Then what do you do after that, you know? So just keep that in mind, that when all of our organizations, like Blue Star Families, get a copy of that. I'll give you a copy of that, my Medicare bill. And, you know, the whole idea, there's 11 languages on the back, Vietnamese, you go on the gamut on that, and then you'll be fascinated that sometimes we're just literally thinking of Chinese or maybe Vietnamese or Spanish or English. And not everybody can master that.
Thank you, sir, for your comments. It's definitely something that I never thought about. So I'm not sure if I'm on a low. Well, all the different languages. Well, yeah. I'm not thinking of Medicare just yet, yeah. But I'm close. I'm in no rush. Moving on to our statistic number 4. And this is actually one I'm very passionate about. So, Chief Esserman, I'm super excited for your thoughts. About 1/3 of Black active duty family respondents report being profiled by both military and civilian law enforcement. And while trust is higher in military police, only half of Black active duty family respondents report they trust their local military law enforcement. So, a question to Chief Esserman. The National Police Foundation uses research to inform policing practices that result in safe, healthy, economically thriving, and mutual trusting communities. How can we strengthen the level of trust in civilian police?
I've been trying to do that for 25 years. I don't know enough of the study to comment on the research, but it rings true in my experience. Probably the most important story I can tell you is that I meet with my officers in groups, and I spend a lot of time out in the field. And sooner or later, an officer of color will tell me that they've been stopped off duty. And often it's with their family in the car. And then when they show them the badge, the cop says, "Oh, I didn't know you were on the job," and lets them go. And that is such a humiliating experience for a Black officer or an officer of color that they often won't travel that road again with their family. I've never heard a white officer tell me that story. I've rarely ever not heard that story from an officer of color. So I would imagine it can't be very different for the military in the uniform they wear. We just wear a different uniform. I think that the solution is a hard one. My experience is that it's hard to hate up close. That if you know one another, then the uniform and the color doesn't become as much of a barrier. So I guess we have to reach out to each other to break bread so that we know each other beyond the first time we meet. You know, you don't build what's in military term, you don't build your spear, you don't build your sword in the time of battle, you build it beforehand. You don't build your shield in time of battle, you build it beforehand. I know people who hate the chief of police. In many cities, that was me. They hate the police department, but they love their cop because they knew their cop, because it was their neighborhood cop. They saw beyond the uniform, and that uniform saw beyond the skin color. And I know people who don't believe in Congress, but they love their congressman. They don't believe in the church, but they love their pastor. They don't believe in medicine, but they love their doctor. I think organizations are made up of people, and we have to get to know each other before we meet in action. And it behooves the leaders of both organizations to make that happen. I don't think that's going to happen naturally. I think that'll happen anecdotally. It has to happen in a more sustained way. So I don't know this research, but I know my own experience. I know research we've done, and it rings true. A personal story, which I wasn't sure I was going to share, but why not? I have 3 children. My oldest son is black. My youngest son is white. My oldest son has been stopped 3 times by the cops. My youngest son has never been stopped. My oldest son looks at the cops differently than my youngest son does. Stopped by my own cops 3 times. So it's hard for me to explain it to him any differently than that.
Thank you for sharing, Chief.
I felt compelled to really jump in on that, because that's, you know, I know when this comes up about profiling, many people are getting tired of hearing it because you've never had that happen to you or been a part of that experience. Now, I am an elected official in Prince William County. I got an entire police department that basically works for me. Still to this day, if a police car pulls up behind me, I straighten up. I look in the mirror, and it's taken me a little bit of time to get comfortable with the fact that I'm not going to get pulled over. But then again, I don't know if I am going to get pulled over. It's this thing. I'm not saying I got PTSD over this, but I am telling you, it's still a thing I go through, and many people go through it. But here's the thing. What I do is spend more time with my police officers, and I talk about these stories I hear. And I literally told the story in the chamber one day where we were praising our police department, and someone said they were basically flawless, and I was like, oh no, that's not true. Let's not go that far. We have a good police department. And I shared the story of walking to the corner at 4:30 in the morning, getting on the omnibus that takes us into the city to come to work. I worked in the Pentagon, and I always work out in the morning. And as I'm walking to the bus stop, this police car passes by, and I'm already in my head saying, what's going to happen next? And sure enough, it did happen. Now, this was back in 2004, so I wasn't an elected official then. But so he comes back over, puts that spotlight on, right? And then he says, can I see some ID? Because we had a report of a suspicious person. Now, as soon as he said that, I said, stop right there, sir, because you haven't had a report of a suspicious person. I've heard this story so many times. I can tell you what you're going to finish saying because I've heard it so many times. Now, we had a long talk, and I shared this in the chamber with, our former police chief, and, he got it. And I'm not throwing the cop under the bus because that's not what this is about. But there is a learning thing that we need to learn of what this is and why do you continue to do these things. Now, I explained who I was. I'm a E9, not just an E9. I'm the command sergeant major. I'm getting on a bus. I'm going into the Pentagon. And things like this is why I still have a little bit of PTSD when it comes to, relationships with police department. And I'm a senior military guy. So imagine what your average kid who's just trying to come up through the streets goes through with moments like that. It's something. So I just share that because the best I can do is share stories with you. Again, just understand this is not a woe is me story because I'm probably one of the toughest dudes who understand how to get through things. And so, but I also think that there's, again, some conversations we got to have so we can start asking these questions of why do these things happen and how do we fix this? What are the conversations of communications back and forth that we really need to have? And true enough, there are so many neighborhood police officers that everyone can specifically name that they love, but then they'll say they don't like the police department or they don't like the police chief. And it's pretty interesting.
Yeah, so thank you for that, Chief. I have one thing. You know, police are years of tradition on talking about progress, right? Want to know how we do things in the future with progress. But, so we changed the American police with 911. First concept of America was equal, we come, free access to cops. We'll always come. You don't know who we are, we have a number on a badge, and know our number. Years ago, a few of us started giving cell phones to cops. So they used a cell phone and gave business cards to them. Now people call the cops. They call cops. And they all difference in the world. So when my son graduated college, I bought a bicycle. With an honest police chief, I couldn't 45 in the car. He came to Nation's Capital, Washington, D.C., the most famous city in the world in America, politically and otherwise. And his bike rod was stolen from him. His baggage chain 30 feet there. Who do you think my son called? He called me. His dad, 1,000 miles away. South American police chief wouldn't pick up on my money. Well, who knows? We don't know the cops. They know their cops. So, one of the things we're rethinking in America is 911. Because you call who you know. You call your uncle, you call your mother, you call your best friend, you call your pastor, you call your neighbor, you call your roommate. To think that America calls 911 is long time. It's not time it's being challenged. So I tell that story because it's an example of penetrating the barrier of anonymity, past experience. And a lot of people have bad experience with cops. They know what a cop they can call if they need to. And I'll tell you a simple secret about detectives solve cases. Solve cases by taking a neighborhood cop, pass it around, and they get it into the cell phone. And then he whispers at the detective ear. It's so that it's unchecked. What TV looks like is crime scene. In reality, it's really
Thank you so much, Chief. I often say relationships matter. And so thank you for reminding us that how important it is to break bread with one another and getting to know each other. Because you're right, I do know a cop. I do know a police officer or a chief, and it hasn't always been my first thought to call that person that I know. So thank you for that reminder. Statistic number 5. Speaking of safety, about 1 in 3 active duty family responders of color report experiencing at least one incident of being threatened or harassed in their local civilian or military communities. In civilian communities, that's 33%. And in the military, it's 29%, due to their race, ethnicity since January 2020. So that kind of blew my mind when I heard just 2020. These are stats. This is actually from Mr. Angry. As a part of the Northern Virginia Regional Commission, can you tell us how the One Military, One Community initiative is creating a more inclusive environment for military and veteran-connected families?
Well, that's a great question because first I'd have to introduce in the room with me today is, Mr. Will Rowe and Peggy Tadaj, and Peggy in particular and Will for the work that we've done with diversity, equity, and inclusion. So we have a military community partnership program in Northern Virginia here that we literally with commissioners from the Northern Virginia Regional Commission, this slide up here, you'll see some stats of what we've done. We have leaders from all over Northern Virginia that meet on this commission, and we all meet now on this more or less breakout committee of military communities. And in that committee, we talk about that gate, the other side of the fence, military to civilian community life, because those two are hand in hand, they go together. And so interesting for me as a retired sergeant major, Army guy who's been in this area forever, this is the first I've seen a relationship like this. And I can tell you this relationship needs to exist on every installation or every county community throughout America, because this is where those relationships get bridged, because we determine things in there. Every month we meet, the base commanders give a base update of the things they're doing. They may share something that we could actually affect. Case in point, child daycare. We know that military child daycare is a thing. It's a real thing, and it's needing a lot. As a matter of fact, I think you had a session here on child daycare, and so guess what? Guess what? We literally are looking at ways in the communities of really what we call targeted industries. And when we look at our economic development, we want to attract businesses. So do we need to make small business with daycare as a targeted industry to really work with homeowners to try to bring that program outside of the installations, which I know they currently have, but how do we do that better? Like, this is still a problem, so how do we get into it? So these are some of the things that we actually do. The other thing is we have, to Will Rose credit here, we have these listening sessions where we really listen to past stories about service members and their issues or challenges or concerns they've had in their military careers, and then share those. And we've done a study, similar, and really pulled out what you have here, and really trying to really address those with our military installations and our communities. And so it's been going very well. I'm happy to be a part of it. I just feel fortunate that, I share the military experience. I'm now an elected official who sits on this particular commission that is doing this work. It's literally like, they say the best way to make God laugh is to tell him your plans. I mean, God has literally put me where I'm supposed to be in this process. So it's very rewarding.
Goes with your last name, Angry. Are you angry?
So thank you all for your willingness to share. Now I want to take the opportunity to open it up to our audience to ask the panel any questions you may have.
Hi, my name is Jessica Kimber. I'm from the city of Colorado Springs as a special assistant to the military advisor there at outside. I'm also a retired naval officer, 24 years, and a single parent. So I'll tell you. One of the things that I took from points 3 and point 5, I believe, was the access, getting the information of all of those organizations, families. Colorado Springs has a very large military population, from active duty to reserve guard to our veterans population. We have
So we have a very large population, and it's difficult, we struggle with this, to try and reach each and every member. So on one installation, you might have the normal garrison, the normal base commander, but then you have 2 combatant commands, or the National Space Defense Center, or different tenants that don't necessarily use the garrison or the base commander as their touch points for their families. So just trying to reach that, we've had to do multiple layers of communication and outreach to make sure that they understand, hey, we have a world-class military veterans center that not only services veterans, but services military spouses seeking gainful employment. We have the Homefront Military Network, which also links you to all these NGO and nonprofit services. We start where DoD kind of leaves off, and it's an incredible network, but we have the same challenge. How do we get to everybody? And we have a massive issue with trying to connect folks. Do you have any recommendations for the city of Colorado Springs and El Paso County of a better way to engage, to get the word out? Do you have any lessons learned that we could take back with us?
I'd love to please jump in. This is Kathy Roth, and I'm the CEO of Blue Star Families. And what I wanted to share is that when we first started doing this work, we looked at who was reaching military families of color, and we found that almost nobody was. When we looked at our annual surveys, which are well known, and we asked people demographic information, but we hadn't traditionally analyzed it. We were looking at other things other than that. We saw that we were very underrepresented in people of color who were answering our survey. And then we looked at the other surveys who were in the field, and we found out that they were also very underrepresented. So people go through trust networks, and for whatever reason, in the military veteran support space, those organizations are disproportionately run by white people, they disproportionately have white boards, and the people they serve are disproportionately white. Everyone has a hard time getting information. Even worse for people of color. And so we have to go, and in order to field this survey that we did, we got terrific response, we had to build those trust networks. We had to find the Facebook pages, the spouse groups, the ROCs or the NNOAs, the different networks that existed for people who were not reached. So we have a couple suggestions. A number of them are on our website. First of all, we have suggestions for telling if you, for auditing yourself to see if you're set up for success. What does my staff look like? What does my board look like? What do the people who I serve look like? If we don't ask that question, we can't even see where we need to go. And then, how do we build those connections into the community? One of the things Blue Star Families is doing is we've created a leadership training program to create more people of color who will be leaders in the MSO and VSO space so that we can populate the leadership that's more diverse so people see the representation. But I do encourage you to look at those demographics. Another thing I would say about the thousands of groups, look at Charity Navigator, because there's 40,000 groups, only 140 have more than $1 million of operating expenses a year. So the vast majority of them really are not functioning groups. There's a very small number that are actually existing enough to do responsible work that involves evaluation. So stick with those 140, and that's a much smaller group.
Thank you. Any other questions?
Don't feel like I need this. Curious about retention rates between white people and people of color, and percentage differences, and if you could elaborate on what you're finding, what's impacting that.
Ingrid, would you like to answer as a researcher?
Yeah. I'm sorry. I don't know the difference, but what we did find, because we didn't compare, this was very much focused on our family and color, and so we did not have a comparison between family of color and what service methods. But we did find were a lot of reasons why retention was a problem, and a lot of our families of color, this is also discussed in the survey, had concerns around comparison of fiscal year, had concerns around, their families, where they might be stationed next, their safety reasons, and those types of concerns that can be very specific to one code experience, microaggressions, discriminatory types of experiences, that could deeply affect retention of our people of color, and then issues around promotion and getting the your choice on sort of place, inclusive of your everyone's profession. So really focusing on those types of issues have affected retention, and our military friends of color, as we've also talked about, talking about dinner table about how military service has affected us as a family. I've had that conversation for sure with my husband, and why service might not be that priority. Those are tough conversations, and I know from my family. My husband is Chinese American. That's the Herrera-Yee. I'm Guatemalan. Our kids are biracial, multiracial, and we have lived in situations where our children are excluded. I myself have been excluded, and so after time and time again, those sorts of microaggressions and those issues really do start to really affect that decision making. Like, why is this really the case? And it's okay. I mean, the good news is that there are strides being made. This is part of that. Talking about it is important. suspended for so long, and hopefully now we have some sort of impasse, on retention and also the recruitment.
We do have the DoD numbers on retention. So especially the officer corps, it's a big issue. So it decreases a lot for African Americans in field grade is when retention. And then for Hispanics, it continues all the way through. If the African American can make it into the general officer corps, their retention is very good. But it's from major through criminal that it's really precipitous drop off. And then even worse for Hispanics. All of these, the full report, and that includes this data, is all on Mr. Family's website.
This is sort of like a criticism when you're a general and above, because you're focused on the mission, a lot less on the people side. We had this, I'm against this, not against, when we say in the Army, I'm just talking about the Army, people first, mission always. It's like a bumper sticker, right? Heck, I got commanders that can deal with retention and not necessarily recruiting, relational. If you're going to lose a lot of people, you're going to ask the recruiter, can you do the backfill right away just to fill in that space? We don't do a very good job of that. Everything is like a byline. I read the Army, or the Defense report on increasing more diversity, equity, and inclusion. Everything is policy, policy, policy. It doesn't touch on the human side of it. Nothing. There's nothing on there that says anything about families. Read it. The report that's dated December 2021, signed by Christopher Miller. This thick. If we spend more time thinking about the 51% of the vote, which will have the 49% stay in, or try to sort it out, we don't deal as much as that, because mission. It is a fascinating tale. This is all after the fact that I had a 3-star commander at Fort Hood, Texas, 20 brigade commanders, 80 battalion commanders in his empire. And he collected all of us. He said, I know you all are going to do 110% in mission accomplishment, but you're not talking anymore about your families. So he literally, General Swartz, this is Thomas Swartz, he literally put on our mission essential task list, family. He didn't care about how we're going to attack this and how many tanks do we have that's deadline or operating and stuff like that. It was about, what are you doing for your families? How are they being cared for? He would literally, this is just one person, he'd literally go into his little bitty sports car, he's about 6'6", and he would put on his running shoes, his denim, his jeans, and he'd look like one of the public folks, but he would just go around in circles after duty hours. And he would go to the housing areas, and if he doesn't see a car parked there, because he would trace all of our cars, the commanders, he gives you a blue note that says, where are you? This is Thursday Family Day. A family day, there's a mass exodus out of Fort Hood of people going home. Now, when they had family readiness group meetings, he said, do not hire a babysitter. You send that soldier home to take care of those kids. But see, he's just one guy. But that one person gave us a lot of unwanted advice that if you screw up, you get a blue note from me. And you have 12 hours to answer the darn thing. And he will not listen to you with a friggin' excuse because you're busted. You did not follow my guidance. We need to do that more often. The other thing is he invited the community inside the base. Up until 9/11, we had this 2 words, force protection. Only people with ID cards or permission can go in the base. We don't do the carnival anymore at Fort Belvoir. which is across the street. We don't do that anymore because you're securing the base. You don't literally, it's a gated community where you don't invite the community. We ought to go back to that. The partnership that you're doing at Prince William County. What? Because we are the military is the economy for that community, right? Maybe we ought to be friends with them more, but that's not happening. If I was king for a day, I'd make every 4-star. I don't care who they are because I can call them by their first name. I said, what did you do to these folks? Because in 4 years you're going to be gone, and the next guy will not follow your step. Just don't say people first, mission always. Mean it. And because we're not diverse up in the top ranks, by the way, at least on the Army side. You know how I know? Every October, there's an Association of the United States convention. And then the first thing I do is I walk up to the famous faces of all my general officer friends. Then I say, how many people of color there? Maybe 2. The rest are white. They know that. What are they going to do? Call me back on active duty? I'll be happy to go back. But then you go to the sergeants majors. And I'm serious. Then you see a lot of color there. Maybe 2 or 3. Why don't we do that on the average, Just be tolerant, I would say. And because they sent me a picture of the Army Secretariat, a lot of women, not too many people of color. So let's just do that on my sensing is that we had some good ideas in the past, before 9/11. It was called the Army Family Team Building, where a brand new family would come in, they're invited to come in and join and talk about issues that's on their mind. But we don't do that anymore. We used to have this thing called the Army Family Team Program, where the family members, because I know I was a co-chair, would meet twice a year, and they'll air out all of their grievances, and the 4-star sitting next to me says, Taguba, did you get that? Because you don't want a member of Congress to get that grievance. Because what's going to happen? You're going to get peppered with all kinds of stuff. And their family, they have kind of a play into that. Somebody had a question. Sorry about that.
Colonel Hanna, then we'll take ma'am.
Thanks for the opportunity. I'm Fred Hanna, Vice President of Government Relations, Outreach for APHIS. 32-year retired Army Colonel. First, let me commend each of you for what you're doing here today. And I think what I've heard since I walked in the room is it's predicated on a lot of trust, getting to know each other, having a conversation with each other. And I think when you look at not just the military, but when you look at society writ large, there's a systemic issue when it comes to race relations and diversity. So my question is, how do we move beyond? We once had a chairman that said, ducks hire ducks, right? And how do we move beyond as a society? How do we move beyond the problem of ducks hiring ducks? And how do we grow that trust and build those relationships in today's society? And Chief, I'd like to ask that question to you. Thank you.
I'm glad to get there. You can make me. There's two people started off with talking about the police force and how they can build some trust. So I'd like to hear your thoughts. Then quoted the chairman or president who said, "Oh, I was sustained by unreasonable people." I think if you want to make change, you got to force it. We run all women's police academy class. That's the first time we train equipment. We didn't have one flag level. Right now, I'm at a stage in my career where I'm being such an elder statesman, just for the joke, given rights. And recruitment and retention are the number one issue in America. This is the end of the song in America. They can't get out, but they can't keep it out. And to a great degree, it's because we're looking for ourselves in the mirror. And fathers and uncles aren't telling their sons and nephews to be trusting, not to tell them to be violent, not happen. So if we are forced or compelled to reach out to people who weren't taught to maybe feel welcome in the past. And so maybe that crisis is the decline in the country that cause us to make our world more open. I think it'll take force. You know, policing is very leader-centric. I don't even look at the attention but I can stop the salute. For 30 years, I never heard to use my understand. They did nothing. Now I hear it all too often. But I think you need leadership to take action. You need meaningful leadership to take action.
And if I may too, I think a big part of it as well is education. And I don't mean just by PowerPoint, which we're all familiar with, if you're anywhere affiliated with the military. I mean real immersion. I teach a multicultural counseling class to doctoral students at Pepperdine University. And one of my major assignments for them is they need to go to a community event of a culture that is not their own. And they come away from that with a greater understanding of that culture and, given it's one time, right? But, I encourage them to do this over and over again. And I think that it's, there's empathy and understanding and education around why it's important. That plus, would be so entirely helpful. I mean, I've seen it change even those in counseling professions who have no interaction with different cultures. And by the end of our term, kids and teens, they have such a greater understanding of the struggles and the challenges and their own bias. And they're much more mindful of that bias, and it becomes a big part of the work for them. And now they're more intentional, right? So it's all about being intentional about not just hiring other guys, right?
So do you think it's fair, do you think it's fair, you said biases, and I agree with you, but I think our biases lead us to rush to failure and prejudge and others without having that 7-minute conversation and realize that we have more in common than we have not in common. Is that a fair assessment? That's probably the room writ large. Just having a conversation and you realize, as opposed to when I walk in late, there's another white guy there. Talk with me, get to know me, find out about like that. By the way, I told the family that folks in charge and I would be late. So you would have known that. You would have known he's late. So, let's not judge each other upon sight, but engage, have a conversation. Let's really see what the commonalities are.
Ma'am, yes.
So I'm married spouse of 26 years, former Army reservist.
And went to basic training 1986, and I'm a young girl from Wisconsin, paired up with another young girl from Wisconsin. So you know what that meant? Like you couldn't separate us in any way, shape, or form. Fort Dix. So I'm aging myself when we had basic training there. About 6 weeks into this experience, the drill sergeants had kept calling us Ebony and Ivory, Ebony and Ivory. I had no idea what that meant. I was 17 years old. So finally I look at her and I said, why do they call us that? And she goes, well, Ivory's white, Ebony's black. And I'm like, she's like, I'm black, you're white. Do you not get this? And we're together all the time. And, it was an amazing experience that I didn't know I was having. And I think, so marry my husband years later, we get stationed at Fort Stewart. I decided to go back to school and get my master's in social work. Well, if you're at Fort Stewart and you want your master's in social work, you end up at one place, and that's Savannah State University. It's a historical black house. I was getting going back to education. I think we need to, especially I think would be great in our ROTC programs, in our higher education, is sending our leaders into our HPCs, giving them that experience that's more than a day. We do this with international students. We do this within our branches. My husband went to the Air War College, not the Air Command General Staff College instead of the Army. You have those unique experiences. He's also in the Signal Corps. He's still active duty. We're very diverse in the Signal Corps and the Army. So, my husband's a white guy, but last 3 people that have promoted him have not been white. And that's just because that is who he has been serving with and have mentored him and have been a part of our community. And so I feel like fortunate as a result of all these experiences. When we went to go to adopt a child, I knew this different looking child would be very warmly welcomed into the community. So I share this is that these experiences happened in my life by chance, but they make you a different person. So we need to, in the military and our neighborhoods, just keep making relationships. And back to the general was saying about AFAP. Well, so we now have an adult disabled son, who is our adopted son. He's now 21. AFAP, you have to do it through the computer, that access. I don't get to walk into an office, share my concerns, share what our family. We've got to get back to face-to-face engagement. I'm also, older, so I like face-to-face engagement. But I think it is a place where the relationship happens again by accident that makes long-term impact. So that was more comment than anything. So thank you for your work, and big fan of Blue Star Families.
Thank you. Thank you for. While we're on this side, let's just go to the gentleman, the lady behind you, and then we'll move over.
Ladies first.
Oh, has he been? Okay.
First, I just want to say that I really appreciate this panel that's here today. And one of the reasons why is because it is a very diverse panel. So we were able to witness you guys' personal accounts from your own, a different perspective. So I noticed that, some of the experiences when dealing with some of, racial inequalities, et cetera, some were more on the extreme end of the spectrum, some were kind of mild, and then some non-existent. But we needed to hear each version. We needed to hear all of those so that we could collectively understand, what this looked like to everyone. And so I know it's overused, representation matters, but it is key, it does matter. And so maybe that if, there are more panels, put together, or more boards, for promotions, that have a very diverse group of people, then we can some kind of way achieve equality amongst all, because I just think that we've gotten to a point where we're beyond really changing who we are as people. So we have to change the way that we behave or the way the processes are put in place, because our natural inclination is just to trust what we're familiar with. Even as a woman, sometimes when I'm walking into a room, if I see the only other woman in the room, I am going to gravitate to her and I'm going to trust what she says because I feel like she gets me, And so I think we do the same thing in race as well. But I think that this is a good representation of how we can change the process and the way that we engage and assess situations, more so than going after thinking we can change a mindset that's been established for centuries. I don't think we're going to accomplish that, but we can do this more. So thank you.
Thank you.
I'm Vance Savella. I'm the Fairfax County's liaison to Fort Belvoir. I just want to make two comments. Fairfax County's been a leading entity in terms of building trust in the community after Ferguson, and our crime rate's pretty low. But after Ferguson, the then Chairman Sharon Bolova decided we needed a committee. It was called Communities of Trust. And it was basically to bring law enforcement closer to the community. And I actually served on that committee for 5 years before I became the liaison. And I'm trying to get Fort Belvoir involved in this too. And it's basically, we have these public safety days where we go into these neighborhoods where the trust isn't very good, bring the fire trucks, and it's public safety. It's not just law enforcement. So yes, it is our police department, it's our sheriff, it's the fire department, it's the Virginia State Police, and the FBI. I mean, it's really across the board. And Shirley Ginwright, and I don't know if that name's familiar to anybody in this room, but she, as a kid, marched with Dr. Martin Luther King. She grew up in Montgomery, Alabama. She was the chair of it until today. The Board of Supervisors just recognized her for all the work she's done in this. But that's one way that we can build trust. And, getting back to, the public safety issue and the mistrust that's been going on. The second thing is the Board of Supervisors created this liaison position back in 2020, right before COVID hit. And I was the one that got selected to do this. This is a partnership. The Garrison didn't really have too many community contacts. And I realized that immediately. Other than our the Directorate of Public Works, there was really nothing. So the Directorate of Human Resources, where Transition Services sits, they didn't know about all the different resources out in the community, so I was charged with trying to help bring all those resources together. So now there's actually a joint employment transition service team, both on the Fort Belvoir side, because they weren't talking to each other, they weren't coordinating on what they were doing. And then there's a second team that involves the community. I know Blue Star Families is part of this, and so is Every Mind, Syracuse University, and we're going to actually build that to a bigger and better thing. And I think it's going to become regional, Supervisor Angry, so we're going to bring Prince William into this. But there's the original Mount Vernon High School, which is on Route 1. It's now a county property. We're actually going to build a human development center that's going to be a wraparound for the community as well as veterans, transitioning military, and military spouses. So these are just some of the things that we're working on in Fairfax County, and hopefully your communities can try to do some of those things.
Oh, thank you, sir.
The gentleman over there. Is your hands getting tired?
I just want to make sure he's not skipping forward. Well, I'm pretty loud, so my name is Rodney Anderson, and I served for 33 years in the Army, and I want to just, yes, sir. Good to see you. Yes, sir. Good to see you. I want to just, first of all, thank you all for really some really good conversation, and especially the initiatives that are taking place that might be employed in our various communities. I live in Fayetteville, North Carolina, which is right outside of Fort Bragg, which is the largest military installation by population. My question really revolves around a couple of realities. And it starts with the browning of America. America is browning. The second thing is our nation and our Constitution is defended by volunteers. And so we really have to be open to encouraging every segment of our population to volunteer to support and defend the Constitution of the United States. And we are not going to be able to influence the Department of Defense or the services in who they select. They will work that. What I think we can do is, I think we can understand how we, in our role in engaging host communities, how we might engage them with tactics and techniques and initiatives and ways that we might help them better understand the diversity of the force. And so diversity, equity, and inclusion, to me, are end states. But it starts with race, gender, and sex. And of those, race seems to always be the big one. And it's whether you're Hispanic, African American, Asian, it all goes to race. So how do we have conversations with host communities that really talk about race? Because that's really the topic, race, and how we really need to understand and treat everyone fairly and constitutionally, because that's who we are as Americans. So how do we have that conversation? Please.
I'm sorry, I had to get it in first. Great question. We've been having these listening sessions, literally, this group right here. And last year, was it last year I was here? And the room, and it wasn't around another, like, we'll say important speaker. So the room had every opportunity to be filled. And I was sharing the results of when I was having this conversation with that group. You could look out and see the looks on the face of folks that it was uncomfortable conversations. And so I've always wanted to literally take those little handheld fans, you know, battery operated, so people can hold them if you feel as if the conversation is so uncomfortable. Because to your point, having these, and they're not really tough conversations, but they are life experiences that really go back to the history of this country that we don't necessarily like. We don't like our history, but our history is who we are today. And there's many conversations that have in them of these stories and these relationships. We don't do them enough, to the point of what many people have been saying here today. But if we could just simply have these conversations and literally just tell it like we're 5 years old, because children don't care. They're going to ask you a straight question and they're going to expect a straight answer. Oftentimes we get uncomfortable with the straight answer, and then we get uncomfortable with even asking the tough question. So we won't address that. Wow, you know, why is your hair like this? Or why do your nails this on? Or why, you know, if you ask them in just a, as we always say in the military, you know, use a tact when you're speaking with people and be professional about it. So it's not so straightforward and demeaning. If we could avoid that and just have a real conversation, I believe literally this is what you're talking about. But in my personal opinion, we should have been here at least 40 years ago. And that's the thing, you know, so I'll pause there.
I also want to thank you for the question. Blue Star Families didn't just do this research, but we also have community impact as one of our goals. So we have a resource for everyone here, which is on our website, but if you also give your business card to CT, we'll send it to you directly. We've got 13 recommendations and 10 best practices for people to use that are practical responses that people in our surveys and in these 100 briefings and workshops that we went through, we have distilled as being some of the top things that in the communities or in the military can be done today that will help address these issues. We're also interested in posting experiences that communities have had that have been very successful. So we'd be very interested in being able to distill the experience of the Northern Virginia engagement and others that people may have, so folks can look at case studies of what works. And then the national needs assessment for military families of color that we performed that derived all this data, we're in a position where we can work with communities for them to do that locally. In Utah, the military installations are looking at working with us to do those locally. Outside of Hill Air Force Base, 6 African-American families have had to be transferred out of there because their children have experienced racial harassment at their schools. It's undermined the readiness of those units at Hill who have prematurely lost people. It's not about fairness alone, it's about military readiness. So they want to understand better what's going on and how they can make a difference. So I want to offer that as a resource too. I think there's practical things, many of which are very simple. Some of the things that people say to us is they want folks to be allies. If someone says something uncomfortable, say something about it. And that's a simple thing, and that's a direction. People don't like this idea of color blindness. Don't say I don't see race. People want to be seen, and they want to be accepted for who they are. So there's some practical small things and some larger, more complicated things.
Is there a website?
There is. So it's on our website, which is bluestarfam.org. And then it's the Racial Equity and Inclusion Initiative. We have all the research and all the other components to it, but we can also email it to you directly if you want. We'd love to get and connect with CT.
Thank you. Any last comments?
Just one last one. So just to give a little background on myself, born Puerto Rican, mom, dad. Statistically, I probably shouldn't even be successful right now in the projects, born up by one single mom. Decided I wanted better for myself, so I joined the military. I wanted the hardest there was, so I joined the Marine Corps. No offense towards any other branch. Had no idea of anything in the Marine Corps, but I'm telling you, from a punk kid from Brooklyn, New York, going to Paris Island, I was in shell shock. Why? Because I've never seen so many white people in my life. The only time that white people came to my neighborhood in Brooklyn, New York projects was to get recreational items and then go back to wherever they came from. And that was the only interaction that I ended up having with them. So when I was shell-shocked inside there and saw so many Caucasian people around me, I was like, holy cow, I'm outnumbered and they're in charge. So I vowed from that point on, when I ended up having any kind of leadership positions, I sought out groups and I would see, because I was an infantry guy, literally we had 4 African Americans in my entire company of 120 Marines, 4. And they would congregate together and I say, hey brother, come here. We grew up in the same areas. You don't just hang out with each other. We are all one fight, one team, and we're all fighting for the same thing. So you better start getting to know him, 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 and him, because I don't want these groups. And because I was in charge, they had to do it. So that's what I'm trying to say is we have to hit people early, because I'm a firm believer that racism is a thing that is taught to someone. We made a mention of a child. A child sees, they just ask questions. Racism is taught, but if we try to erase that, that's who we need to end up getting with. You mentioned JROTC. I was a JROTC instructor once I retired. And I said, why do we not have a female color guard? Why? Nothing in the order says we cannot have a female color guard. The order states they all have to be the same size and they better be in shape. But at the same time, it says nothing about gender. So I said, we're doing an all-female color guard. And they still have that at the high school that I taught at. It's things like that, though, that we have to see something and make a change. And I'm very sorry if I don't mean to offend your general officer, because I truly respect you. However, if the general officer makes those comments, that's great. But it's the NCOs, it's that small leader unit, that small unit leader that's going to make the changes. Because that's the person that they're going to go, he sees me every day. And if I don't do what he says, my life is not going to be good. So when the general officer comes around, you're going to see him once a year maybe. So that's what I say. That's the things that we need to focus on. And I'm sorry that it wasn't more of a question, but I was successful in these things. And you know, like I said, punk kid from Brooklyn, shouldn't even be here right now. And God bless. You know, I'm very blessed, but worked hard for where I was at. And I want to make sure that other people can be successful too.
But I'll be very quick. So I retired last September, and one of the last things I did was sit on a panel with all of the leadership from NORAD and US Northcom. And I was the senior female there, but we had representation both in gender, in rank and grade, and race. It was refreshing to hear the conversation, and what was more refreshing was to watch our leadership not only listen, but take action. And so these types of things are happening at commands. They are happening at the lowest level, down in the work center, all the way up through the division and up to the 3- and 4-star level. One thing I will take from this, and one thing I share with you, is that there's 2 pieces. The first is helping an individual find their voice. For women in the military, it took us a long time to find it, but when we found it and we could take the moment to educate someone instead of get defensive. So I'll go to Home Depot and I'll park in the veterans parking space. And at least like 1 out of 3 times I'll be like, hey, that's for your husband, honey. Oh, wow. So, and I'm like, well, hey, thanks for noticing. Hey, I'm Commander Kimber. It's nice to meet you. 24 years in naval service. Hey, let's go inside. Maybe you can help me carry some lumber. Right? But you take a moment to educate people, you do it in a friendly way. And the second piece is, it comes back down to why does it matter? You know, from military readiness, why does it matter? It matters because it is such a distraction to the mission, and we're all about mission readiness, but more importantly, it is about the person on your right and your left, and it doesn't matter what service you're in. Make fun of you because I'm Andrew Crayon. But it really comes down to, it's always been about the person on the right and your left, and it's about dignity and respect. And if you have that, and you have that relationship, and you can have those conversations, you will get there. I'm pleased to say my daughter came home the other day and she's like, hey mom, you're gonna get a call. But a bunch of us just participated in a protest over racial comments that were being made about our fellow students. I was like, I've never been more proud of you. Tell them to call. But that is where it starts. It starts with our families. It starts with our shipmates, our guardians, our Marines, all of them. And then the person to your right or left. That's all I have to say.
Thank you so much. Thank you for an amazing panel. Please give the panelists a round of applause. I would just like to follow up really quickly. If you have not seen our REI event, where we had amazing, all of our sister services had the opportunity to talk about what they're doing in this space. Please go to bluestarfam.org. You will be pleasantly surprised to see what the Marine Corps, Air Force, Army, Coast Guard, Navy are doing. So thank you. Have a good evening.
All right.